Welcome to On the Money Line, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Nazim, and I'm here to break down the event that goes down this weekend on Saturday at UFC Vegas 69, which is now headlined by Jessica Andrade versus Erin Blanchfield, which I actually think is a really good main event. The card itself, though, is a little bit weak. I don't think it's necessarily the fault of the UFC, though. The event has lost a number of really good fights. I think 3 or 4 good fights that have ultimately lowered the strength of the card. Fights such as, obviously, the original main event, Marlon Vera versus Corey Sandhagen. I agree with the UFC with what they did here, though. That wasn't a cancelled fight because a fighter got injured. The UFC just moved that main event to another event, to an event that's going to have a crowd that's not in the Apex. So I do agree with that move from the UFC. But other fights such as Carlston Harris versus Ramiz Brahimaj, which was going to be a grappler's delight, staying on grappling delights. We've got Joe Selecki versus Benoit Saint Denis that got cancelled. Then we've got Gerald Meerschaert versus Abus Magomedov that got cancelled. Of course, the original, well, not original main event, but the second main event, Tyler Santos versus Erin Blanchfield, but Tyler Santos pulled out. So the card has had a lot of changes to it, and we've been left with, unfortunately, what looks to be a weak card. But we'll get into the breakdowns. There'll be value from a betting perspective in certain parts as well. So although the card might be a little bit weak from the outset, we will still find some value at MMA Play 365, just obviously not on this podcast. That'll be in our subscription packages. But just before we get started, as always, there's going to be a Base AI recap from last weekend's amazing pay-per-view that absolutely delivered at UFC 284 from Australia, down under in Perth. And that Base AI recap from our UFC prediction software will be in the Base AI specific playlist on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/MMA Play 365. If you are interested in the AI, the algorithms, the prediction software, then make sure you go and check that recap out. But let's get into it. Let's go. We'll break some fights down. And of course, we start in the main event, Jessica Andrade versus Erin Blanchfield. Now, this is a bit of a strange one because I really like Tyler Santos against Erin Blanchfield. And I'm a fan of Erin Blanchfield as well, by the way. At the beginning of the year, myself, Sean and Hannah, who work within MMA Play 365 also, we all put our predictions out for who is going to be the champion in each division by the end of 2023. And Erin Blanchfield was my prediction to be the flyweight champion at the end of 2023. But like I say, from a real ironic and strange perspective, I liked Tyler Santos a lot in that specific matchup, and I was going to bet Tyler Santos as well. But obviously she's pulled out and we've got Jessica Andrade. Now, from the outset, I think Jessica Andrade is a much tougher fighter than Tyler Santos in general for opponents to deal with, just because she's got that explosive nature, that aggression, that power. She's good everywhere, Jessica Andrade. However, in this spot with Erin Blanchfield, I actually think Blanchfield is going to have a number of opportunities to be able to start pulling away with this fight. Now, the one thing that stood out to me straight away with Jessica Andrade is when she fought Valentina Shevchenko, and this was the difference between Andrade and Santos. Santos was the one taking Shevchenko down, getting the better of the wrestling exchanges and the grappling exchanges. But when Shevchenko took Santos down, Santos was able to get back up to her feet and scramble out. Now, Jessica Andrade against Shevchenko, when Andrade was getting taken down, for the first couple of attempts, Andrade was scrambling and getting back up to her feet, showing her back as well, which is something that I don't really like to see, especially when a fighter's about to be fighting a good grappler, which is what Erin Blanchfield is. But after a few scrambles and a few get-ups, Andrade was just pinned down by Shevchenko. And she was pinned down in the half-guard positions, side control positions, and then Shevchenko got a mounted crucifix on Jessica Andrade as well. Now, you look back at Erin Blanchfield versus Molly McCann, strong in half-guard, strong in side control, got the mounted crucifix, unleashed hell on Molly McCann, and she pretty much did the exact same thing against Miranda Maverick as well. And Miranda Maverick is a decent grappler also. Obviously not the level of Blanchfield, but what I am trying to say is there's a pattern emerging in regards to the offensive and defensive jiu-jitsu games from Blanchfield and Andrade, from physical tape what we've seen. Where it becomes a little bit difficult for Blanchfield, in my opinion, is on the feet striking, because I do still think that Blanchfield's a work in progress. I do still think she's very green on the feet, although she is developing and improving from fight to fight. You can see that. You've got to bear in mind that she's really, really young as well, early 20s. She's got 5 or 6 years before she even starts getting anywhere close to a prime as an athlete and a professional mixed martial arts athlete. So there's a lot of room and there's a lot of time for Blanchfield to develop that striking, but I don't think the striking's there right now where she can be overly competitive with Andrade. And that's where, in my opinion, the fight just starts to become very difficult for Blanchfield, because she's got to then now activate her wrestling, her trip. She's got to be able to get the fight down to the mat either consistently or be able to get Andrade down and keep her down for, you know, a couple of minutes at a time in order to do good work, steal rounds, and obviously keep the fight off the feet, which is where Andrade will likely light Blanchfield up. I don't think Blanchfield is like a fish out of water in regards to her striking. It's just I don't think she's on the level of Andrade. However, something else that I kind of feel that favours Blanchfield in regards to, again, the closing of the distance and getting her trips and getting her wrestling going, is the fact that Andrade is very aggressive. So she'll bring that fight to Blanchfield. She'll close that distance for Blanchfield, even though it's not in probably the way Blanchfield would like. I do think, again, we flip back to the Tyler Santos style. I think Blanchfield would have had to have been the active fighter closing the distance on Santos, with Santos not having that as much forward pressure and aggression. So I think Blanchfield would have had to have worked harder in regards to her movement, whereas I think here she's not going to have to work quite as hard in regards to the movement, because Andrade is going to be doing a lot of that work for her. So again, I think it's a close fight from a stylistic perspective, because I think Blanchfield is outmatched on the feet, and I think that Andrade is going to be outmatched on the mat. Maybe not initially, but I think if this is a 5-round fight that, by the way, Andrade is taking on short notice, stepping up in weight as well. Not that Andrade obviously hasn't fought at 125 pounds before, but, you know, she's constantly fluctuating between a weight division. She's stepping in on a week's notice here. She's not going to have been preparing for a fighter like Blanchfield with a grappling. So I do think that Andrade in the initial moments is going to look like she's going to blast Blanchfield out the water, but I think the longer this fight goes on, the more I think Blanchfield can bring herself into the fight. I do think she's going to find takedowns. I do think she's going to eventually find some decent top control time where she is controlling positions for 90 seconds to 2 minutes, maybe 2+ minutes of a round as well. And I think Blanchfield's going to really grow in the fight once she's weathered a little bit of a storm from Andrade. Once she starts getting the takedowns, Andrade might start being a little bit hesitant from the striking perspective as well. So a really close fight. I think a really phenomenal fight as well. A fight that's got a massive clash of styles with a dominant striker versus a dominant grappler. And I do think Blanchfield's one of the best grapplers in the division as well. And a lot of fighters, most of the fighters in the division are going to have problems with Blanchfield's grappling. Close fight, good stylistic matchup, but I am going to be siding with Erin Blanchfield to win this fight. And in the next fight, in the co-main event, we've got Zach Pauga versus Jordan Wright. Now, Pauga's making that move back down in weight to light heavyweight, which I think is a good move for him. Although he would have been a very light moving heavyweight, quicker than most natural heavyweights, I just think his frame is so much more suited for light heavyweight, and I think he's been matched up with a good fight here against Jordan Wright in regards to, you know, the fight's going to be a little bit crazy to start with. That's normal because of Jordan Wright and his fighting style, but then I think that Zach Pauga is going to be able to really showcase his skills, and I think where Zach Pauga's best is within that patient approach to his striking. He's calm, he's relaxed in there. He will throw out volume. He's got good fundamentals, but then once he gets past the fundamentals, he can start sitting down on his punches. He's got a decent wrestling game. He's got a decent grappling game. He's one of these real good all-round type of fighters. With Jordan Wright, though, Jordan Wright's live in every fight for at least the first 2 minutes of the fight, and then that's where the drop-off can become. But that storm that Jordan Wright brings early in the fight is serious, and Jordan Wright's got a striking background, so he's not exactly just one of these big bullish fighters that will come forward and just wing bombs at you. He does have technique behind the bombs. He does have power as well. So it's definitely something that Pauga's going to have to mind his P's and Q's with. But do I think that Pauga gets caught by something from Jordan Wright and gets put away? I think it's unlikely, just because Pauga does have a real good mixed martial arts type of style, an all-round type of style. He's also got good fight IQ. He's good defensively as well as he is offensively as well. So again, from the defensive perspective, that's going to be crucial here in the early moments. As long as Pauga just doesn't lose his head and starts brawling with Jordan Wright sending that brawl invitation out to Pauga inside the cage, which I don't think Pauga's going to do. I think Pauga will be okay here. I think Jordan Wright might even get hurt himself coming forwards a little bit recklessly, throwing his strikes and trying to put that storm on Pauga. There's the opportunity where Pauga might find a hole or a gap in the defense if striking of Jordan Wright and land something on him. But all in all, regardless of Jordan Wright starting fast, slowing down a little bit, I think Pauga's the better technical striker from both a boxing and kickboxing perspective. I think he's going to be a better wrestler. I think he's the better grappler. I think the fact, like I've already said, that he can fight well moving forwards and backwards and fight well both offensively and defensively as well. Then you add in the fact that Jordan Wright does slow down the longer the fight goes on. I think Pauga, like I've said already, he's just got to mind his P's and Q's early, which I think he will. I think he'll be fine. He'll weather any storm that Jordan Wright brings. And if Jordan Wright doesn't bring a storm, then I think Pauga's just going to be the more technical fighter anyway. I don't see Pauga having too many issues in this fight with Jordan Wright. I think it's a good fight for Pauga to get himself back in the cage, come back from that bad knockout loss that he suffered last time out against Muhammad Usman, get himself back in the win column. I'm picking Zach Pauga to win this fight. And in the next fight, in the heavyweight division, we've got Josh Parisian versus the newcomer Jamal Pogues, finally making his UFC debut. So we'll start with Pogues, the UFC debutant. He had 2 stints actually in Dana White's Contender Series. The first fight that he had in there, he was a light heavyweight. He looked good. He looked big for a light heavyweight as well. He had good wrestling, good explosive wrestling. He was an explosive striker as well. Plenty of power, decent volume on the feet, and also good movement. But the real good aspect from Pogues that I took from that fight was the fact that his wrestling was very, very good, and the fact he was a big light heavyweight. I thought that he was going to have a lot of real good advantages over natural light heavyweights once he got to the UFC, but he didn't get the contract. So he came back for a second time in the Contender Series. This time he fought at heavyweight, and it looked like a completely different fighter. The wrestling wasn't there. He was standing, he was striking, but the movement wasn't light and erratic like it was at light heavyweight. He was very stationary, very static, throwing just one punch at a time, making things really close. He did pick things up in the third round when it was getting very close to the end of the fight, but ultimately Pogues looked like 2 different fighters. One fighter at light heavyweight, a fighter that I liked quite a lot, but then at heavyweight, he just didn't look the part at all. And it's surprising that he's in the UFC from that heavyweight fight and not the light heavyweight fight. So I was going to be really intrigued to see where Pogues came into the UFC. If he only took that fight at heavyweight because that was the fight that was available to him, it would have absolutely made sense. And also the performance would have made sense if Pogues just preferred fighting at light heavyweight and he just took that shot at heavyweight because that was the shot that was available. But that's not the case. He's come into the UFC against Josh Parisian at heavyweight. Now, I think for Jamal Pogues, he's not got a bad fight here against Parisian. I think it's definitely, if this was a different type of fighter, if this was a Parker Porter, or if this was a Justin Taffer, obviously I've just named 2 fighters from last week, it would have been a completely different beast, because nothing against Josh Parisian. I think Parisian's got one of these good MMA all-round games, but I do think that Parisian's beatable. I think that if Parisian gets put on his back, I don't think he's going to have too many answers. But then you've got to ask the question, is Pogues actually going to use his wrestling? Because he seems to use his wrestling, or used his wrestling in the Contender Series quite a lot at light heavyweight, but does that extra weight at heavyweight make him have a cause for concern in regards to energy expenditure because of the additional weight that he's carrying? We just don't know. However, like I said, I think even if you strip back and forget that light heavyweight happened in the Contender Series, I think Jamal Pogues is good enough on the feet from a technical standpoint. I think he's good enough to be competitive with Parisian, steal rounds from Parisian. I do think that obviously he's got that wrestling in his back pocket if he needs to as well. So when you're looking at potential outcomes of this fight, I think Parisian's going to have a tough fight if Pogues starts mixing in the wrestling. If Pogues doesn't mix in the wrestling and it's a boxing match, in a sense, inside obviously a cage in MMA, if it's essentially a 15-minute boxing match or kickboxing match, I think Parisian's going to make this fight really close. Therefore, I don't think the line's going to be justified at all. But it's just the fact that Pogues does have that wrestling in the back pocket that makes you question if he does use it, then, Josh Parisian's not going to be that live in this fight for a win, in my opinion. I do have to side with the fighter that I do believe has a couple of paths to victory, because outside of the wrestling, Pogues could still win a very sloppy 15-minute kickboxing brawl with Josh Parisian. Again, there's a knockout available. He does have power. If it goes to the judges, then I think that Pogues can do just enough to edge rounds. But then you add in the wrestling as well. That becomes your second path to victory. Yeah, it's a real interesting fight to see where Jamall Pogues is going to take this fight. But from a prediction perspective, I'm picking Jamall Pogues to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got William Knight versus Marcin Prachnio. Another fight, in my opinion, that's very well matched in regards to both fighters are going to be very, very competitive. But I do think it's also going to be fun at parts as well, because it's obvious where both fighters are strong. It's obvious where both fighters are flawed as MMA fighters, where they have the gaps and the holes within their MMA games. And I do think it's a fight that's going to be won and lost on the feet. I don't think either fighter is very wrestling heavy, although I don't think you can rule any wrestling out here. Opportunistically, it wouldn't shock me to see either fighter shooting for a takedown, especially if one fighter's getting hurt on the feet or getting beat on the feet from a volume perspective, just being outstruck. So yeah, I wouldn't rule any wrestling and grappling out. However, I just don't think either fighter is a strong enough wrestler to be able to keep the other fighter down for too long and get a whole load of control time. So therefore, I don't think the fight is going to be won and lost with any wrestling and grappling, so I don't see a finish on the mat, and I also don't see, if the fight goes 3 rounds, the judges taking any wrestling and grappling into consideration, just because I don't think there's going to be enough of it for them to make a judgment there. And on the feet, both fighters are very different. So William Knight's very low volume. Yeah, I don't think he throws too much. I think he should throw more, but again, he's big, he lifts a lot of weights, he does a lot of strength and conditioning from that weight lifting perspective. So I do think there might be a cause of concern for Knight there, not wanting to overextend on anything, throw too much, throw too hard, just in case he does start tiring out. He's a very, very big dude, but he does hit like an absolute truck when he lands. Then you've got Marcin Prachnio on the other side. I don't think he's as much of a hard puncher, a power striker. He's definitely more of a lighter striker on the feet. I think his background's Kyokushin karate, so you can definitely see that Prachnio is going to be the better mover here, the fighter that I believe is going to have more volume as well. But then the problem with Prachnio is he does tire out a lot as fights go on, whereas William Knight will probably carry that same level of energy, but that's because he's not working or won't be working as hard as Prachnio in the early moments. So this is where it becomes a very interesting fight. So then I'm focusing on William Knight and the power that he's got. And I think this power could be a real equaliser on Prachnio, because even if William Knight's volume's low, if Prachnio comes forward and starts trying to land a ton of volume on Knight, and Knight just hits him with that one big shot that might stun Prachnio, if it doesn't knock him out, it might stun him, it might daze him or rock him. And then Prachnio's instantly going to have that respect of Knight. He's going to become a little bit hesitant coming forward and trying to land too much volume on Knight. So then Prachnio might still have the volume edge, but that volume edge is suddenly not so much of an edge because it's being reduced because of the fact that he's concerned about Knight cracking him. But then as the fight goes on, especially if Marcin Prachnio is trying to move in and out constantly, maybe getting a little bit frustrated that he's not putting too much volume on Knight because of the concerns of the power coming back at him, I do feel that Prachnio could then start that tiring process where, his cardio does start getting a little bit drained. But overall, I think that if Knight's landing the harder, bigger shots, even though they're not going to be as often, obviously the judges have that big power-friendly judging style where they're preferring fighters with that fight ending intent and the power and trying to finish the fight at all moments. But then if Knight's throwing like that, which he will, he's then got that finishing upside just in case he does land on Prachnio. So then I'm starting to think, well, William Knight's got a decent fight here. He's going to get out-volumed, but he's probably not going to get hurt. But he's probably going to be winning the minutes and winning the rounds just because he's going to be looking to try and take Prachnio's head off 3 or 4 times a fight, and if he lands big, it's going to make a big noise in the apex. And then, like I say, he's genuinely got that big knockout power. So yeah, I think it's going to be a difficult fight for Prachnio in moments, maybe not early on whilst Knight is setting in, but once Knight settles in, finds his feet, I think Prachnio's going to be in for a tough fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking William Knight to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Jim Miller versus Alexander Hernandez. So Alexander Hernandez has stepped into this fight on short notice to fight Jim Miller. And when the fight was actually announced and Hernandez was stepping in, I was very high on Hernandez in this spot. I thought, Hernandez is going to handle business. He's going to take it to Jim Miller. There's a big age discrepancy here. There's a big athletic discrepancy. There's a big striking speed discrepancy. Alexander Hernandez is the young, youthful athlete, whereas Jim Miller is the aging 39-year-old veteran. And everything seemed to point to Alexander Hernandez. And I thought, if Hernandez is around minus 200, minus 250, there's probably some value there from a betting perspective. But actually, when I dug in and watched tape, man, I just do not trust Alexander Hernandez anymore. I've won a couple of bets on him in the past. I've been burnt a couple of times with him as well, which is fine. But actually trusting Hernandez to really put it all together and put it all together without making any mistakes and doing this over 3 rounds without tiring out as well, he's just a very strange fighter to watch, because he's got all the skills, he's got all the abilities, he's extremely well-rounded, his wrestling's solid both offensively and defensively, his grappling, you can tell he's an educated grappler, his striking, he puts combinations together well, he puts power behind his strikes, he mix kicks up with his punches within the combinations. But there's just something not right there for Alexander Hernandez, because he will always have his good moments in his fights. He'll always at least win a round. But then he slows down a little bit. The good movement that he starts with stops relatively shortly after. Then his wrestling and grappling, that's not as much of an attack for him. The combinations start becoming 1 or 2 shots at a time. The movement's a little bit more static, and I just don't understand Alexander Hernandez as a fighter, because he's got all the tools to legitimately be a contender and be a great fighter. Then you've got Jim Miller on the other hand. He is the exact type of fighter that's going to be able to take advantage of a young fighter or youngish fighter in Alexander Hernandez, who's starting well. Jim Miller's going to weather a storm, and then if Alexander Hernandez starts to drop off from a performance perspective, Miller will be able to pick things up because of that veteran quality that he's got. Then if Alexander Hernandez makes any mistakes, shoots in with a neck out too wide, for example, on the side, then Jim Miller's going to be able to capitalise on any submission opportunities, especially that guillotine, which Jim Miller's got a nasty, nasty guillotine. If Alexander Hernandez shoots a bad takedown and Jim Miller reverses him and gets on top of Hernandez, Miller's going to be comfortable there. So really, the more I was researching this fight and looking at it, I'm thinking, well, Jim Miller's actually quite a bad matchup for Alexander Hernandez, because if Hernandez is making a mistake, Miller will capitalise. If Alexander Hernandez slows down and drops off from a performance perspective, Miller's going to be able to capitalise. If this fight ends up playing out where just that veteran head with the fight IQ is enough to really just separate both fighters when all's said and done, then Jim Miller is more likely to be that fighter that's going to do that. So I just think that Alexander Hernandez is not... I'm not saying he's got to fight the perfect fight, but what I'm saying is Hernandez has got to really be mindful in this fight that he doesn't make any wild mistakes, that he doesn't come out too hard and drops off from that cardio and performance perspective late in the fight, that he is just doing the right things and being mindful of when he steps in and out of range, when he decides to shoot for a takedown. He's just got to be careful in so many areas. However, it still is bringing me back to the fact that Alexander Hernandez is the younger fighter, is the more athletic fighter, is the fighter that, in my opinion, as long as he doesn't go balls to the wall, he doesn't go too hard early on, and he doesn't make a mistake, I do think this fight could look relatively comfortable for him, because Jim Miller's just not going to have opportunities to get into the fight too much if we see the best version of Alexander Hernandez. And I kind of feel that Hernandez has jumped into this fight because he knows that he's not going to have too much of a weight cut. He's very aware that he's going to be the faster fighter. I think speed's going to be a massive factor in this fight. So although I've got massive concerns on Alexander Hernandez's side in regards to trusting him, there's red flags there, there's ifs, there's buts, I am still drawn to Hernandez being the younger, more athletic fighter. He's got power, he's going to have a speed advantage as well. I think the wrestling is going to be able to get Miller down. We've seen if you can get Miller flat on his back and you're away of getting guillotined and you're just minding your P's and Q's. So if he's throwing up legs for arm bars or triangles, I don't think Hernandez is going to get caught in an arm bar or a triangle, from guard. there's just things that bringing me back round to Alexander Hernandez. So yeah, for those reasons, I'm picking Alexander Hernandez to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Lina Lansberg versus Mayra Bueno Silva. And I think this is going to be a difficult fight for Lina Lansberg. I think it's a fight where she's going to have some moments, but I think the moments are going to be more early than late. But I do think that Mayra Bueno Silva is going to pretty much have Lansberg's number wherever the fight goes. I think from a striking perspective, Silva's dangerous, she's aggressive, she'll come forwards. I don't actually think she does a bad job fighting on the back foot either if Lansberg's the one advancing. But I think from a striking perspective, Silva, again, is going to have a power advantage and aggression advantage over Lansberg. She's a little bit younger as well, so again, she's going to have that more youthful energy about her. That hunger is going to be there a little bit more from Silva. But then when you start looking at the wrestling and grappling of Silva, again, I think these are advantages as well. It wouldn't actually shock me to see Lansberg shooting takedowns on Silva. I just don't think that if she does get Silva down, she's going to be able to keep her down for too long. And then you have to consider that Silva's got a decent submission game off her back, so she's dangerous there as well. I just feel that when I'm looking at ways for Lina Lansberg to win this fight, I don't think she outstrikes Silva. I don't think she lands that punch that knocks Silva out or the kick that knocks Silva out. I don't think she's going to be able to routinely take her down consistently, and if she does get her down, I don't think she's going to be able to keep Silva down for too long. I still think Silva's going to be the more active fighter, even if she's on her back. But then I do think that when I'm looking at how Silva can win this fight, I think if it's a 15-minute kickboxing fight, Silva beats her. I think if Silva's shooting for takedowns relentlessly, I think she's able to get Lansberg down. And if she gets her down, I think a grappling on top is going to nullify anything that Lansberg tries to do defensively off her back from that defensive grappling perspective as well. So I just think it is I think it's a difficult fight for Lansberg. Then again, it draws me back to the age. You know, I said that Lansberg is a little bit older than Silva. You know, she's a lot older than Silva. Lansberg's now 40. Silva's in a prime at 31. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of upside on Silva. I think stylistically she should have Lansberg beat in every single aspect of mixed martial arts, but the amount of times that we say this and then a fight like this does end up being close. But listen, I don't see Silva losing this fight. So, for those reasons, I'm picking Mayra Bueno Silva to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is a really interesting fight, and I think it's actually going to be a really good fight. Definitely one of the fights that I'm keeping my eye on Saturday night. We've got Jamal Emmers fighting the newcomer Khusein Askhabov. Now, apologies if I've absolutely butchered that name. Just running with what I can do there, the best I've got. But Askhabov's a really interesting fighter. He's a fighter that's not fought for a couple of years, so he's not fought since he was 25, I believe. He's 27 now, but this dude's 23-0. Now, when you look at his record, you know, there's going to be a couple of fights on that record early on where probably padding records in regards to, you know, matching in favour of Askhabov. I don't think he's got anything crazy where, you know, he's fighting guys that are like 1-10 or 2-14 or whatever that is. But I do think early on he had some fights where it was going to be relatively clear that he was going to win the fight. But listen, every fighter that does have a really good record has normally started off with those types of fights, fighting 0-0 guys and, you know, just seeing where he's at. But the other thing you've got to consider is that Askhabov's been fighting since he was 16 years old. So it was probably a wise thing to put him in there, not with killers at 16, 17 years old. So, yeah, 23-0, definitely a fighter that got my attention straight away as soon as I've seen him. So then I started looking into his abilities. He's got hard low kicks. He's light on the feet. He's almost got that Zabi Magomedsharipov style in regards to his kickboxing, but then also like Zabi, he's got his takedowns, his trips, his throws, his suplexes. He's got an active submission game. His takedown defense is okay. He's got good scrambles. And like I say, he genuinely just looks like he's a very exciting fighter, but a really good and well-rounded fighter. You go onto his Instagram, you look that he's also living the high life, you know, nice clothes, fast cars, that type of thing. However, I do have it on good authority that this guy is legit. He's not just a fighter that's 23-0, being padded up, that's hyped up and he's not got the skills or qualities to back it up. He's also the brother of Hassan Askhabov, who fights in Bellator as well. Both of these brothers are really, really good. They're really legit. They are legit prospects. So I do think that Askhabov has got a real exciting entry into the UFC here. Like I said, the other thing as well, I've already said it, he's not fought for a couple of years, so not fighting since he was about 25 and then coming back a couple of years later. That is the type of fighter that you're going to see improvements from, because he's going to look different, in my opinion, to what we've seen previously in tape of Askhabov. And then the other thing to actually kind of back that up as well, Askhabov is normally a bantamweight. He was a very, like I said, he's been fighting from 16, so he's always been this very, skinny kid that's really quick, and you're just waiting for him to grow into that frame, into his body as a man. And he's done that. He's now fighting up at featherweight. He looks completely different from a build perspective now than what he did when we're watching in his old fights. And you can see that on Instagram. He's filled out. He's, like I said, the frame's much bigger. He's now moved up in weight division. He's not fought in 2 years, like I've already said 3 times now. So the developments and improvements and skill set is going to be there as well. He was a Tiger Muay Thai product that I think cross-trained with American Top Team. Now it looks like he's followed the Hickman brothers to Bang Tao Muay Thai, where we've seen Alexander Volkanovski training other tons of real high-level fighters. But then now he's in Vegas at the Performance Institute and doing work with Dewey Cooper from his boxing perspective as well. So again, just everything seems to be fitting the bill with Askhabov, that he's a fighter that, is going to come in here ready, prepared, and he's going to look different and better than what we've seen before, which is a scary prospect considering that he looked amazing outside of the UFC. But with all this good stuff said about Askhabov, he's not being given an absolute can for his UFC fight. I mean, there's no cans really in the UFC. UFC fighters are in the UFC for a reason, but he's been given Jamal Emmers, who is a very solid fighter also everywhere. He's a good striker, he's fast, he mixes kicks in with his punches, he's got a wrestling background, he's okay from a grappling perspective. So they've not just thrown Askhabov in here with a fighter that he should absolutely run through. I think that Jamal Emmers is a tough test for any fighter. I mean, look at Giga Chikadze way back when, Jamal Emmers, in my opinion, won that fight, or at least went close enough to be considered the better winner over Giga Chikadze. And look what Giga Chikadze's done since. He's now at the top of the division. Not at the top, so to speak, but he's, a top 10 fighter. And yeah, listen, Jamal Emmers is definitely no joke. I think it's going to be a really good fight. I think there's going to be plenty of striking, plenty of wrestling, plenty of grappling. And I think that we're going to see a true mixed martial arts fight that's going to be back and forth, that's got a lot of powerful strikes. I just think it's going to be entertaining. I think it's definitely a fight that's up there for what should probably be the favourite for fight of the night. And from a prediction perspective, I am actually siding with the newcomer in Askhabov. I do like what I see from him. I think that although Emmers is going to be competitive, he's going to bring the fight to Askhabov in moments as well. He's going to make Askhabov work. The only concern I've got is Askhabov's going to be carrying a little bit more of that weight that I've said now is filled out into his frame. What's his cardio going to look like if Emmers is wrestling heavy? But then Emmers doesn't really wrestle too heavy, even though he's got takedowns here and there. But Askhabov's a good wrestler himself, defensively and offensively. If Jamal Emmers is put on his back, then that could be interesting. I just think this is a really good fight, but like I say, I really do like what I see from Askhabov, and I'm very confident that he's going to come in a better fighter than what he was before. 2 years out, Tiger Muay Thai product, now Bang Tao, used to cross-train at American Top Team, now at the Performance Institute, where he's going to be getting that help on his frame and his weight as well. So yeah, really, really good fight, really excited for it. That's why I've spent a little bit more time on the breakdown. But yeah, from a prediction, I'm picking Khusein Askhabov to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Ovince and Preux versus Philipe Lins. And I think this is going to be a close fight, in my opinion. I think both fighters are really well matched. From a striking perspective, I wouldn't really give too much of an edge to either fighter. Wrestling, again, grappling, again, same thing. I just think that although we could see a true mixed martial arts fight here with both fighters looking to wrestle and grapple as well as strike, I do think the fight's more than likely going to be won and lost on the feet striking, just because I feel that's where both fighters predominantly are best, and that's where their second nature will go to, just to keep the fight standing. The longer the fight goes on, the more they get tired, the less likely they're going to be to wrestle or to try and grapple with each other. So I do think it's a fight that's going to be, like I say, the majority of the action, for as long as the fight goes, is probably going to be on the feet. And I just think it's going to be a really close fight. I think that Philipe Lins does bring something from a speed and movement perspective over Ovince and Preux, who, in his veteran age, shall we say. He's a little bit slower than what he has been previously in his career, a little bit more static. He plods around a little bit too more. You won't see too much erratic movement from him, but I don't think he minds that. I think if Philipe Lindsay's moving around, he's going to be expending energy. I think when Lindsay's coming into range, Ovince and Preux will have that range closed for him. He'll be able to start slamming kicks into Philipe Lindsay. Something that I like that Ovince St. Preux does a lot as well is the fact he switches stances to match his opponent's stance in regards to if his opponent's conventional orthodox, then OSP will switch southpaw so he can start firing kicks to the bodies of his opponent. If his opponent switches southpaw, Ovince St. Preux will switch to orthodox conventional to start again landing kicks to the open body. And I think that Philipe Lindsay can be got at in regards to just getting his cardio broken down a little bit. I do think Philipe Lindsay is going to be better in the early moments in this fight, but I just don't think that he's going to take Ovince St. Preux out. And I think the longer the fight goes on, I think Ovince St. Preux is more experienced. I think he's definitely more there from a fight IQ perspective. He's been there, done it. Philipe Lindsay is not going to present anything that OSP hasn't dealt with before. And I just think Ovince St. Preux will be able to take over the longer this fight goes on. And if Lindsay doesn't take him out, then I think he will be able to win here. And I don't think Lindsay is going to knock Ovince St. Preux out. Could be wrong. It's happened before. Philipe Lindsay does pack power into his strikes. I just don't think I don't think Lindsay is going to knock OSP out in round one. Therefore, I think OSP is going to have opportunities to really take over this fight the longer it goes on. For those reasons, I'm picking OSP, Ovince St. Preux, to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got another newcomer. We've got Nazim Sadykhov versus Evan Elder. So Elder, some people might think is making his UFC debut as well, but he's not. He has already had a fight in the UFC. He just took it on short notice. Elder, a recap on him, is a fighter that is scrappy, is well-rounded. He's got this typical MMA style, this new era MMA style where he'll attempt takedowns. He's got decent MMA wrestling. He's got decent MMA defensive wrestling, but he can be taken down at the same time. And he's one of these real scrappy cardio grinder type of fighters that is always going to be in the fight. And if he's taken down, which, he does have questionable defensive grappling, but again, he can create scrappy scrambles and make things awkward for fighters when they're on top. But he's, like I say, he's one of these decent all-round scrappy grinding type of fighters that someone's going to really struggle to put a stamp on the fight when they're fighting him. But over on the other hand with Sadykhov, now Sadykhov, he trains out of Serra-Longo, trains with the likes of Aljamain Sterling, for example. He's got a good kicking game, so he loves to kick, probably spins a little bit too much if I'm being honest, but he really does love his kicking game. He lands heavy kicks to the body. He, in regards to when he gets on top of his opponent, he's got heavy top control. He's got good ground and pound, good elbows in ground and pound as well. He's one of those types of fighters that if he sits in guard, he'll probably just try and posture up and land on you rather than trying to really put a grappling clinic on. But he's also a good defensive scrambler as well, so if an opponent is trying to take him down, he can create those scrambles to get back up to his feet. He's got a decent wrestling defensive game as well. Southpaw fighter, once he's taken down, he can get back up. He's got a hard left hand. I don't think there's too much movement from a defensive perspective on the feet striking. Fights decent moving backwards as well as moving forwards. Will knee in the clinch when everything's closed up a little bit. So again, from the description that I'm giving you of Sadykhov, he's very much like Evan Elder, but I just think that Sadykhov's more polished. I think he's a slightly better technical striker. I think elements of his game are slightly better from a technical perspective as well. And not only that, I genuinely think that he's going to be making the necessary improvements to really solidify himself as a UFC caliber fighter. Like I said, training at Serra-Longo, training with the likes of Aljamain Sterling, under Ray Longo as well. He's going to be improving from fight to fight. And I think that is definitely key for, like I say, for Sadykhov to just solidify his position in the UFC, not become one of these fighters that's in there for a one round of your contract and then, the UFC don't want to renew your contract and you're no longer a UFC fighter. And unfortunately, I kind of feel that what I've just described at the end there is probably Elder. I don't think that... Listen, I think Elder's going to be a difficult fighter to beat. I definitely think that Elder's a fighter that's going to be tough. He's going to be gritty. He's going to be grindy. He's not going to be able to be completely run over. And I don't think Sadykhov comes out here and absolutely puts... And an amazing clinic on Elder. I think Sadykhov's going to be forced to fight, forced to dig deep. But like I said, I just think Sadykhov is the better quality fighter, the fighter that's going to be having the higher ceiling, that's going to be around in the UFC a little bit longer, that is the UFC caliber fighter. And as I've already mentioned, elements of his game I just think is more technical than the elements of Elder's game. I think it's going to be a close competitive fight, but I think Sadykhov's going to do enough here, wherever the fight goes, whether it be striking, wrestling, grappling, to be able to get the win. So for those reasons, I'm picking Nazim Sadykhov to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got AJ Fletcher versus another newcomer, Themba Gorimbo. Now, we'll start with the newcomer, Themba Gorimbo. Fought the majority of his career out of the EFC in South Africa, and I am not convinced with fighters coming from the EFC in general. Like, there's rules to that exception, Dricus du Plessis being one of them. I think that Dricus du Plessis is definitely a fighter that's come out of the EFC with world-class abilities. I'm not convinced until I see it in the UFC that Themba Gorimbo, what I've seen in tape, is going to be able to come out here and do, especially against AJ Fletcher. So Themba Gorimbo, he's tall, he's rangy, got decent fundamentals when he wants to, but then he will also have moments from a striking perspective where he'll put his head down and just swing those big windmills, those big bombs with zero technique behind them. But ultimately, he does look to wrestle. He's got a decent single leg takedown, decent double leg takedown. Once he gets on top, he's not necessarily a prolific grappler. He'll just be happier sitting in one single position, sitting in guard, landing ground and pound, doing just enough that a referee is warning him, but then not standing the fight back up to the feet. But then he's winning rounds, he's winning minutes, and he's doing some relative damage as well. However, we have seen him get taken down himself, and when he's taken down, he, on the flip side, literally doesn't have too much off his back. He struggles to get back up to his feet. He struggles. He's got a decent initial scrambling ability, but then, like I say, once he's settled on his back, you can keep him on his back. He doesn't look like he's a threat from a submission perspective. He's not really too active in trying to obviously submit, but then stand up or improve his position or sweep. You know, he's not that type of fighter. He genuinely does look like he gets stuck on bottom. And there's two aspects to that game, and that's sort of what's making me feel, well, I don't really trust what I've seen in the EFC because of the level of competition that I know he's been fighting. And then you've got AJ Fletcher on the other hand. AJ Fletcher, he's very well-rounded. I think he's light years ahead of Themba Gorimbo in regards to striking. I think that AJ Fletcher's got a huge striking advantage here, but AJ Fletcher's also got a decent wrestling game as well. He, you know, when he does want to search for takedowns, he bursts into a double. He's got blast double leg takedowns. He will be able to get fights down to the mat if he wants them there. From a grappling perspective, there is a difference between Fletcher and Gorimbo here. I don't think Fletcher does have that solid top control time where he can really ride minutes out on top. I think he does give opponents opportunities to get back up to the feet, but then I look at Gorimbo after he's been taken down, he doesn't really fill me with a ton of confidence that he's going to be able to really expose AJ Fletcher's top game in regards to his grappling and being able to find his way back up to his feet, because he just hasn't looked, in the moments I've seen him taken down, he just hasn't looked like he's been giving too much effort and energy to get back up. So I think it's going to be an interesting fight. I think if Gorimbo takes Fletcher down, I think Fletcher's going to be able to get back up to his feet or reverse positions. I think if Fletcher takes Gorimbo down, I think he's going to be able to have a lot of good top control time, because Gorimbo has looked to get stuck. And of course, Gorimbo might make improvements maybe, but I'm just going from what I've seen. And then I think from a striking perspective, AJ Fletcher is going to be the much better striker, better combinations. He packs power as well. He's got genuine knockout power. The only thing that really worries me for Fletcher is Gorimbo's definitely the more relentless type of wrestler. But again, if he's relentlessly wrestling, I do think he can do that for 15 minutes without tiring out. So that's where my concern is for Gorimbo. But I do think Fletcher's the better quality fighter, the more UFC level fighter, and the fighter that I trust more, considering, like I said, Gorimbo's just come straight out of EFC, and I just need to see what his qualities are like against a fighter like Fletcher before I make that decision if he's going to be that real good UFC caliber fighter. Because if he can do what he did in the EFC, in the UFC in regards to the takedowns and the top control time, this is going to be a fighter that's going to be very difficult to beat in Themba Gorimbo. But I just question that level of competition. So for right now, I'm picking AJ Fletcher to win this fight. And the final fight breakdown of this episode of the podcast, we've got Juancamilo Ronderos versus the newcomer Clayton Carpenter. Now, there's a real difference between both of these fighters. You've got Carpenter that looks to be more of a crisp striker, decent combinations, forward pressure. He just looks like he's got an element of comfortability about him. He's relaxed inside the cage and he's just much tighter with everything that he does as a mixed martial arts fighter. But then on the flip side with Ronderos, he's a fighter that will swing wildly into exchanges. He will relentlessly shoot for takedowns. He'll chain wrestle against the cage. He will try and keep that pressure on against the cage. He's strong in the clinch, but then he's also got this wild side to him where his entries into takedowns are a little bit subpar. He kind of always ends up on his back, even though he's the one that's creating the opportunities for the wrestling and engaging in the wrestling and grappling. For some reason, he just always ends up on his back, and he appears to be losing fights until he then comes back and wins, which you can look at that both ways. You can look at that as a massive red flag, especially in the UFC, but then he's coming back from real bad positions and winning fights. Like, that is the epitome of a good fighter who's facing adversity early in his career and then pushing forwards and getting wins. And once you start ironing out those mistakes, a fighter like that will just end up continuously winning. But I think in this spot, it's just really hard to trust Ronderos, because I think Carpenter, from an MMA perspective, is just a real good MMA fighter. He looks like he's got decent takedowns himself. If he's got decent takedowns, then he's likely going to be okay from a grappling perspective in regards to, you know, the defensive work that he's going to be putting in. He's got that good forward pressure, aggressive movement. He's got a variety of different kicks, which could keep Ronderos at the end of that kicking range. So Ronderos is going to have to work harder to get into range to start engaging in the wrestling. I think Ronderos, if he can really get his wrestling game going and really show improvements than what we've seen in previous fights, then he could have more success here. But I just find it right now, from what I've seen, and I can only go from based on what I've seen watching tape, I can only go with seeing Ronderos consistently shooting wild takedowns, subpar entries, ended up in worse positions, even though it's him that's created that engagement in those areas, ending up on his back. And I just don't trust that. Listen, when you get to the UFC, outside of the UFC, when you're doing things like this and you're on the back foot and you're not winning rounds and you suddenly come back and win, those types of fights, just like they say with knockouts on the regional scene, those types of things dry up once you get into the UFC and you're fighting UFC caliber fighters. I'm not sure Carpenter's going to be the exact fighter that's going to completely run through Ronderos. I do think it's going to be a competitive fight. I do think it's going to be close in moments, but I just have to side with the fighter that does look like he's winning minutes and rounds rather than the fighter that's losing the fight until he wins it. So for those reasons, I'm picking Clayton Carpenter to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. Ended up much longer than usual for some reason. Not quite sure what happened there. But listen, as always, thank you for tuning in. We are on every single podcast platform. So, of course, if you are driving, if you're commuting to work or wherever you're going and you haven't got the access to watch or listen to the podcast on YouTube, you can find it on everywhere else: Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, all the good places. So once again, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. As always, I'm Newsome, and I'll see you again next week.